On day one of the Trump administration, we declared an all-out war on the dealers, smugglers, traffickers, and cartels.
We have permanently removed a drug trafficking organization out of the streets of Philadelphia, and they're going to stop pouring guns and chemicals and drugs into our communities, and our children are safer today.
At 3:50 in the morning, a single quiet breath hung over Kensington before the street erupted into light and force. The silence broke under the crack of a flashbang, and within moments, federal armored vehicles rolled through the narrow blocks while drone rotors sliced the air above. Tactical teams from the FBI, ICE, and the DEA hit 9 locations at the same time, moving with the speed and precision of a coordinated battlefield assault rather than a traditional police action. Breaching tools shattered doors that had been reinforced for years, and agents pushed through hallways lined with chemical spills, pill dust, and discarded packaging that showed how deeply fentanyl production had rooted itself inside the neighborhood. Inside the first target, a pill press still running at full speed was pulled from the operator's hands, its conveyor filled with thousands of counterfeit oxycodone tablets strong enough to end lives across several states. This wasn't a routine drug raid. This was a federal war theater operation designed to dismantle an industrial fentanyl machine that had turned a community into a national threat. If you want more real operations like this, hit like and subscribe to Military Power. Because what the agents stepped into after that first breach changed the entire raid. The neighborhood was still wrapped in pre-dawn haze when the first tactical team moved into position on the narrow street that bordered the old rail line. The houses were dark, the windows sealed, and a thin layer of moisture clung to the concrete as if the block itself was holding its breath. That false calm lasted only a moment before the breaching unit pushed forward, carrying a hydraulic ram that hit with enough force to echo off both ends of the street. The door of the first target folded inward, and agents in layered armor swept through the entryway with lights piercing every corner. Movement in the hallway sent commands rippling through the stack as they advanced toward the basement stairs, where the low mechanical thump of a pill press beat like a warning sign. Inside the basement, the air was chemical and bitter, heavy with powder that clung to gloves and helmets. Stainless steel mixers were still spinning, and the press operator barely had time to look up before he was taken to the floor and restrained. Thousands of counterfeit oxycodone tablets ran in a continuous ribbon along the conveyor, some already hardened, others still damp with binding agents. The machine shut down with a groan that rolled across the room, marking the moment the first of 9 production sites finally stopped breathing. As agents secured the equipment, others opened storage bins stacked to the ceiling. Vacuum-sealed packages labeled as medical testing kits were packed tight with fentanyl powder, a detail that confirmed what investigators had suspected for months but had never captured in real time. Upstairs, another team cut through a makeshift wall panel that revealed a hollow cavity stuffed with bundled cash. The bills were wrapped in rubber bands, some new, some discolored from humidity, and all part of the revenue chain that fueled the organization's expansion across multiple states. A secondary sweep found semi-automatic pistols taped beneath a kitchen counter and a stack of identification cards belonging to people who did not live in the house. Every small discovery shaped a picture more complex than the network that had been outlined in intelligence briefings, showing a structure with redundancies, depth, and a level of planning that resembled organized crime far more than street-level dealing. At the second location, less than a mile away, agents encountered an obstacle that signaled how prepared the group had become. The door had been reinforced with a welded steel crossbar and a secondary locking plate that resisted 2 initial strikes from the ram. When the entry team finally broke through, they moved quickly along the narrow hallway, stepping over piles of syringes and broken pill molds. A man tried to escape through the back exit, but a drone unit tracking heat signatures spotted him as he darted into an alley. Ground teams intercepted him before he reached the next street, ending a brief chase that underscored how tightly coordinated the operation had become. The third target revealed the discovery that shifted the tone of the morning. A suspect had been sitting at a cluttered kitchen table with a phone unlocked in his hand, its screen bright in the darkened room. When agents secured the device, they found a series of short, coded messages describing the federal surveillance pattern around Kensington. Phrases noted when a specific patrol car left its post, when a camera went offline, and when the neighborhood's busiest dealing corner appeared unwatched. The timestamps were recent, and the detail was too precise to ignore. Someone with access to city systems had been feeding information directly into the network's communication chain, allowing dealers to evade monitoring and protect high-value shipments. As the messages were photographed and logged, the lead supervisor called for an updated briefing. The raid was only minutes old, yet the discoveries at each address already pointed towards something much larger than the operational files had suggested. This was no longer simply about shutting down an illegal lab. It was a direct confrontation with a system that had woven itself into the neighborhood with planning, protection, and inside knowledge. And as the evidence piled up, one thing became clear. Someone had been protecting this network from the inside. In the hours after the raid, the chaos of the morning gave way to a different kind of battle inside a secured federal analysis room. Tables were lined with seized electronics, each tagged and stacked according to location. Laptops, encrypted phones, SIM cards, hard drives, and even modified routers were placed under bright inspection lamps as analysts from the FBI and Homeland Security worked in parallel to pull every fragment of data they could extract before the system owners realized their network had collapsed. The hum of extraction software filled the room, while forensic teams took turns cross-checking timestamps, tracing message routes, and comparing device IDs. Within minutes, early patterns began to emerge. The first major breakthrough came from a cluster of phones recovered at 3 separate sites. Their location histories overlapped in a way that suggested the operators moved freely across Kensington, without fear of law enforcement. Analysts noticed long gaps in police surveillance logs, correlated with windows in which these devices traveled through high-alert zones without triggering any patrol responses. When mapped on a timeline, the pattern showed Kensington had been turned into an unofficial safe zone, a place where fugitives, re-entry offenders, and high-value couriers could circulate repeatedly without being intercepted. Someone had engineered predictable blind spots, and the device data proved those blind spots were being exploited systematically, not coincidentally. A drone map created from surveillance flights earlier that morning drew an even clearer picture. When teams overlaid the 9 raid locations with previous FLIR and night vision drone recordings, the image transformed into a network diagram. Each target lit up like a connected node, with frequent foot traffic, supply drops, and messenger activity linking one to another. Street-level movement formed branching paths between the houses, resembling short-haul supply routes rather than random trips. The analysts realized they weren't looking at isolated drug dens, but at a synchronized manufacturing chain stretched across the neighborhood. The supply chain revealed itself more dramatically through customs data. A Homeland Security team combed through months of cargo records and noticed 37 containers arriving over the last 6 months from ports in Mexico and Texas. Each shipment carried generic labels that classified them as industrial equipment or non-medical testing components. Several containers had their identifiers tampered with, small enough changes to slip through automated systems, but meaningful enough that an experienced investigator could see the manipulation once the evidence was in front of them. A deeper cross-check tied some of these shipments to shell companies created less than a year earlier. The frequency and timing of these arrivals matched the spike in overdose deaths in Philadelphia and beyond. The turning point came when agents began connecting the import data with what the teams had seized inside the labs. Chemical signatures from the raw fentanyl powder aligned with known manufacturers in Mexico, and packaging materials matched bulk shipments routed through Texas distribution hubs. The organization wasn't just producing pills for local distribution. It operated with a structure that mirrored cartel logistics. The blueprint became unmistakable. Import raw precursor chemicals, move them to basement mills and rowhouse production sites, convert them into counterfeit pills through industrial-scale presses, and then distribute shipments to dealers across 11 states, including Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, and Illinois. What had looked like a Philadelphia-based crime ring was actually part of a multi-state fentanyl pipeline. As the investigation continued, the financial layer of the network surfaced. Ledger entries pointed to digital wallets that moved hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. The transactions hopped between exchanges, funneling money into accounts registered under names scraped from stolen IDs. Each transfer involved shell corporations that claimed to provide cleaning services or IT support contracts to commercial buildings across the Northeast. Those companies, when examined more closely, had no real staff and no physical offices, only inboxes and registered agents. Some of the money flowed into accounts belonging to contractors who handled maintenance of public systems, an unsettling clue that explained how surveillance vulnerabilities had been exploited. The moment of realization, the true breaking point, came when a senior analyst compared the financial map with the movement data and shipping logs. The patterns aligned too perfectly to be a loose coalition of dealers. Everything had indicators of discipline, hierarchy, and long-term planning. The operation resembled a cartel-linked distribution chain more than a local drug market. What agents stormed that morning was merely the surface of a machine that had been running with military-like coordination. For the first time, the scale of the adversary became clear. This was not a raid on criminals hiding in a neighborhood. This was the exposure of a multi-state fentanyl empire disguised inside a collapsing community. When the map finally stabilized, it showed the same truth across every layer. This was not a network. This was a command structure. By the time the operation reached full momentum, more than 300 federal officers were already moving across Kensington in a synchronized wave. The FBI's tactical units formed the backbone of the strike, supported by DEA interdiction teams and ICE HSI agents who had spent months mapping each address. Philadelphia police provided perimeter control, blocking off intersections and redirecting early commuters, while the federal teams executed the assault. The coordination resembled a battlefield maneuver rather than a city raid, with every squad moving according to a timeline, broken down into seconds, not minutes.
This is one of the largest and most impressive gang takedowns that I have ever seen.
The first target was a narrow row house, fortified far beyond anything seen in previous operations. Investigators had long suspected it was the network's primary chemical intake point, and the welded double steel door confirmed that theory the moment the breach team arrived. They drove the hydraulic ram into the center seam, while a second agent applied a cutting tool to the hinge plate, and the combined force collapsed the frame in just 12 seconds. Inside, the air was thick with chemical residue. Bags of precursor powder were stacked beside a table, covered in measuring tools, all laid out as if the operators expected to return within minutes. Agents secured the space in less than a minute and moved on, marking the first site as cleared. The second location was already rumbling by the time the team descended into the basement. A heavy-duty pill press was operating at full speed, its metal arms slamming rhythmically as thousands of counterfeit fentanyl tablets rolled across the conveyor belt. Two men attempted to flee through a side corridor, but ran directly into an ICEHSI containment unit assigned to intercept external movements. The press was shut down, samples were collected for evidence, and the basement was photographed extensively to capture the industrial scale layout. This single room represented a lethal output that could have fueled overdoses across multiple states. The third target sat on the top floor of a mid-rise apartment building overlooking a major intersection. From the outside, it looked like any other residential unit, but intelligence reports indicated it was the financial node of the operation. When the door came down, agents stepped into a room filled with vacuum-sealed bundles of cash arranged in rows on the floor. Some were marked with colored tape indicating distribution zones, while others were still grouped by shipment batch. A pair of laptops were left open on a table, displaying spreadsheets of coded entries and digital wallet transfers. The occupant attempted to hide behind a closet panel, but surrendered quickly when the thermal drone above flagged his presence and guided the team directly to his position. The fourth location shifted the tone of the morning. It contained an arsenal that suggested the network was preparing for violent confrontation. Agents found crates of semi-automatic rifles, stacks of magazines, and a small number of modified handguns. Ballistics specialists on the team documented each weapon, some of which were linked to interstate trafficking investigations. The discovery underscored how dangerous the organization had become and why the operation required federal-scale coordination. The fifth location held the ledger room. This unremarkable two-story home had been transformed into the network's nerve center, where supply chain records were kept with meticulous detail. 3 people were inside, each working over notebooks filled with dates, container numbers, and coded shipping routes. Phones with encrypted messaging apps were lined up against one wall, still buzzing with incoming notifications. The team recovered every document, knowing these entries would map the flow of fentanyl from ports to neighborhoods across the country. While ground units pressed forward, the command center maintained control through a 3-dimensional tactical map that updated in real time as drones scanned rooftops and alleys. FLIR cameras tracked heat signatures on upper floors, guiding teams to hidden suspects before they could escape. One man attempted to break through a back exit and sprint down a narrow alley, but an agent intercepted him at the corner after a brief chase that ended when he slipped on wet pavement. Another suspect tried to hide in the crawl space of an abandoned house, but thermal imaging detected him tucked inside the rafters. Within 9 minutes, all designated targets were secured. Dozens of suspects were taken into custody, including high-value individuals responsible for laundering profits and managing the supply chain that connected the organization to suppliers in multiple states. Hundreds of thousands of lethal fentanyl pills were seized, along with weapons, cash, encrypted phones, and ledger records that would become critical evidence. The district, once dominated by open-air dealing, was momentarily silent. If you're still watching this federal offensive unfold, hit subscribe, because the next discovery changes everything. Kensington entered an unusual quiet after the last lights from the raid faded. The streets that had served as open-air markets were now lined with tables covered in seized pills, chemical drums, wrapped cash, and dismantled equipment. Federal trucks waited along the block as agents packed evidence toward secure sites, leaving behind a neighborhood that looked stripped of the machinery that had fueled its crisis for years. Inside the command center, analysts from the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security began turning the morning's chaos into a coherent picture. Phones, laptops, and ledgers seized across 9 targets were arranged under bright lamps, their contents copied and sorted. Message logs extracted from multiple encrypted devices revealed recurring coded phrases, mentions of a blue line compromised, warnings of a safe window closed, and notes on clean hands at precinct suggested that sensitive operational information had been leaking from inside institutions meant to protect the city. With these clues, analysts began assembling the network's full structure. Raw narcotics arrived through manipulated cargo shipments. Basement mills converted them into counterfeit pills in industrial quantities. Couriers moved the product across several states, and profits circled back through digital wallets, shell contractors, and front companies posing as IT or infrastructure services. When mapped, the sequence showed a complete and disciplined fentanyl pipeline designed to avoid detection at every stage. 5 individuals emerged as anchors of this hidden system. Each appeared connected to a company with legitimate contracts, but minimal real activity. Their access permissions, payment histories, and metadata ties placed them close to the coded messages found earlier. They were the link between the criminal network and the city infrastructure it quietly exploited. With that discovery, federal teams expanded the investigation beyond Kensington. Customs records were re-examined, especially the 37 containers received from Mexico and Texas that matched the timeline of the operation. Surveillance logs were checked for outages that aligned with fentanyl movement. Financial specialists traced payment app transfers that moved thousands of dollars in structured transactions designed to avoid reporting thresholds. Every layer added reinforcement to the conclusion that this was not a collection of dealers, but an engineered ecosystem with institutional footholds. When analysts calculated the damage inflicted by the raid, the impact was clear. 3 major production hubs, responsible for most of the network's output, had been captured or destroyed. Removing them eliminated around 70% of the organization's capacity, leaving its distribution lines starved and its financial patterns exposed. By the time the findings were presented to federal leadership, the meaning of the operation had shifted. The raid had not only arrested suspects or seized drugs, it had fractured the central machinery of a fentanyl empire that had operated with alarming precision. Kensington's silence was the first proof that the system was finally starting to break. Stay close. The next discovery doesn't come from the street. It comes from the institutions that failed. When the gunfire faded, the real damage finally appeared. The streets were quiet, and rows of evidence trucks lined Kensington while agents loaded crates of pills, weapons, and electronics. But the silence revealed something deeper than the raid itself. The system that had protected the network was still intact, and that was the threat federal teams now needed to confront. Analysts began the internal purge immediately. Contract files were pulled, vendor histories were reviewed, and every IT infrastructure and transport agreement connected to city systems came under inspection. The 5 individuals flagged earlier, linked to shell companies and suspicious service records, became the starting point. Their financial movements, access permissions, and work histories showed how the network had quietly entered the city's machinery and used official systems to shield itself. Private security firms received the next wave of scrutiny. One company, already connected to unexplained surveillance outages, had its license revoked and its equipment seized. Financial investigators followed with asset freezes, shutting down accounts used for laundering revenue and recovering property purchased through the operation's profits. The objective was no longer just to eliminate the dealers. It was to strip away the institutional cover that made their expansion possible. Outside, the neighborhood reacted with a mix of disbelief and relief. Residents who had lived next to open-air markets watched crews clear the debris. A mother stood with her child on a block that had been dangerous for years, now briefly safe. It became the unplanned symbol of what the raid had disrupted. City officials responded by forming an integrity review task force to audit access points, contractor networks, and surveillance gaps. Their message was simple: rebuilding trust required rebuilding the shield from the inside out. The infiltration that enabled the fentanyl empire had been more dangerous than the dealers themselves, and its removal marked a different kind of victory. By week's end, Kensington was quiet, not healed, but reset. It was the kind of silence that comes before a new chapter, when a city begins to reclaim what it nearly lost. What happens after a morning like this? Who protects the system when the system itself has been breached from within? Those questions now hang over Philadelphia, but their weight reaches far beyond one neighborhood. The collapse of a fentanyl network in Kensington is a reminder that any American city, from the East Coast to the Midwest, can face the same danger when criminal organizations adapt faster than the institutions meant to stop them. This takedown shows that when cartels shift their methods, the nation's defenses must shift even faster, and trust in the shield that protects communities must be rebuilt piece by piece. The lesson is clear. Fentanyl pipelines do not weaken on their own. Corruption does not dissolve without pressure, and safety is not automatic. It is maintained by people who choose to stand on the right side of the fight. So the question now turns to you. As an American watching this unfold, Where do you stand in the effort to secure your streets, your institutions, and your future? Stand with the shield, defend the truth, and subscribe to military power, because the larger network is still out there.